Great. Many friendly faces on the line. Thank you all for joining. Good afternoon, good morning. Welcome everyone to today's Purpose Under Pressure webinar, where we're going to unpack the latest findings from this collaborative research. I'm Whitney Daly, Executive Vice President at Allison & Partners and co-lead of our Purpose Center of Excellence. I'm joined today by a very esteemed panel, really some of the best and brightest practitioners, thinkers, researchers within the purpose space. I don't need to do deep bios or introductions on this group of people. They really need no introduction, but I'm so thrilled to be joined today. I am here with Carol Cohn, founder of Carol Cohn on Purpose, Wendy Solomon, Managing Director at Harris Poll, and Erin Pickering, Executive Vice President at Headstand and co-lead of the Purpose Center of Excellence. Our four organizations came together to create this leading research, Purpose Under Pressure, which really examines the state of purpose today and where it's headed with critical insights from employees, one of the most important stakeholders we really need to take into account today. I will pass it over to Carol in a moment to get us started, but first, a few housekeeping items. Today, we'll share a deep dive of the research, but we're really going to spend a bulk of our time in a panel conversation where we can share key learnings from the research and practical applications for everyone on the phone today. We'll also be leaving 15 minutes for audience Q&A, so please do not hesitate to drop your burning questions into the Zoom Q&A function, and we'll do our best to field as many of those as possible. You can add them throughout today's presentation. And if you haven't checked out the research, you can find the full report on our website, purposeunderpressure.com. And with that, I will pass it over to Carol to get us started.
Thanks, Whitney. I'm so excited to be part of this esteemed group. And as we all know, big challenges in social and environmental issues today need to be attacked and addressed by collaborations and coalitions. So it's a great mind of leaders here. And it was really fun, actually, to do this kind of work. Collectively, we have conducted, we were adding it up, over 100 pieces of research. I did my first piece in 1993. I know Whitney's done zillions. And of course, Harris, our esteemed partner, has just done so much research, proprietary as well as for the public. We're calling this type of research, and a lot of people have talked about the Great Resignation or the Great Reset. And I heard in a conversation recently, someone talking about the Great Contemplation, because during COVID and all of the time that we spent back at our homes and with our families and our furry friends and children and things like that, it gave us an opportunity to really pause and say, what is important to us? And so just think about this. Over our lifetimes, on average, we will spend 90,000, and for you overworkers, 100,000 more hours working. That's a third of our lives. And what we have found at the core of this research, and we really wanted to do about employees. And for those of you who know me, for decades, I have said the number one stakeholder is employees, and now the world is catching up to us. So we wanted to go deeper. And the number one thing from our piece of research is that employees want more meaning from their work. Because from the Great Contemplation, it's like, if I'm going to take my 90,000 hours, what does it mean to me? What am I contributing? Where are we going? Who are the teams I'm working with? How can I bring my best self to the work? And how can I deliver on my full potential? So we're going to talk about the details of this. Then we're going to get into a marvelous conversation, and then we're going to take questions. And so I'd like to turn it over to my colleague. And I just have to say, I have huge hugs. I love this woman. This is the third piece of research I have done under Carol Cohn on Purpose. She personally is a joy to work with. She is just no drama and all intellect with a big heart. So Wendy, take it away.
I was hoping you were going to pass it to me. That was an excellent tee-up. Thank you, Carol. So part of the tee-up, actually, when I think about how we think at the Harris Poll, I love this notion of where we're going and what matters, but I think we really need to honor what has caused that. And so we're going to get into this employee research that we did, but I just really thought it was important to start this by honoring the moment. So March 2020, Harris has had this great privilege of, measuring culture and business and all the things. And now all of a sudden we realize, let's make that a responsibility to really understand the business backdrop, the cultural backdrop. This is what we call our fear curve chart. It's every week. We're showing the last year or so, I think, in the data. Americans right now, of which employees are a subset, are not at a lack of what to worry about. We have economic fears, we have health fears, we fear returning to public activity, we're worried about new variants, whether vaccines will or won't hold. We have had this unimaginable context as employees, as business leaders, as voters, as partners in life. These are your employees, these are the people across the dinner table from you. We are celebrating, and only 37% of us are afraid of dying. So the context in which employers and employees are functioning, we all deserve a big round of applause, absolutely, but it's absolutely created different expectations for companies. So our employee research, we went out in late March, right? So you could follow up and see plenty of fear in March when we did this research. We talked to around 350 employees. We chose those who are manager level and higher, and it's a mix of industries and mix of levels. And so I think we're going to find that that's something we're really pleased we did, because there's some great intelligence there. So let's dive into the data against this context then. So first of all, I'm going to tell you 5 things, just so you know where we stand. What we have learned is that during points of instability, purpose can be undoubtedly a grounding element within a company. I've done research for a lot of years, and I can tell you that to get data in the 90s, high 80s, in such a divided landscape, it's not always the case. And so I think that it is a very clear, full-throated, whether it be emotional, it makes me feel like I'm in the right place, whether it be tactical. I think that companies focused on purpose are going to be more successful. This is a business case for purpose. What I think is interesting, and I think it's happened to how Carol teed this up, is that we feel so much more agency in our choice of employer. We feel as if the past 2 years, perhaps I've been participating in that great contemplation, and it's made me think more about how my work can actually impact society. Right? That wasn't always something that we thought about. And so we see a really, really unique environment, not the least of which is that 84% will only work at purpose-driven brands. When I think about that agency notion, those that, I think about my job as something that helps me contribute to the world. We looked at that data by those right now who are in the market for a job, like those who are hunting around versus those who are stable. And those who right now are looking to change employers are even more feeling this way. They're even more likely to say that I actually see my work as a way of contributing to society. I think this is a really important context. So seeing your work as contributing to society, the idea of the past 2 years having sort of changed the yardstick that we use to evaluate companies as employees, we asked the question, what matters more to you now? You're thinking about changing jobs, you're thinking about getting a new job, staying put where you are. What is the yardstick that you're using? What's more important than it used to be? And I think what's really interesting, you've got 2/3 of employees in America saying, my company's ability to make a positive impact on society is more important than it used to be. So I think we've all been part of the headlines where like, oh, people are negotiating for these crazy salaries, the great resignation, the great renegotiation. That is, so the amount of people that say social impact is more important now than before is the exact same that say salary is more important now than before. So the wins are very strongly at the back, not just is it important, but we see it becoming increasingly important. I just want to voice over, because I think I have a lot of clients that we speak to that they're sure that this is a Gen Z phenomenon. They're sure that this is not a very, writ large kind of trend. And what we can tell you looking under the hood is that this is absolutely more important across generations, right? So this is not a smaller piece. So moving forward, I do think part of what we want to then look at is that, well, let's look at the different levels in the organization. So we have this gift of being able to cut the data by where you sit in the organization, and presumably how much influence you have. And what we find is that whether it's helping to understand purpose, those in the C-suite, always, and it's sometimes a linear response, not always exactly, are far more likely to have a line of sight into purpose than those who are lower titles. If you just look at C-suite versus manager, you just see this difference. And by the way, we only surveyed those manager and up, but we haven't even talked to sort of the frontline employees in many ways. So whether it's thinking our purpose efforts are more mature, and here maturity means sort of more than a slogan. Purpose is the way we innovate. Purpose is the way we do M&A. Purpose is the way that our new product roadmap aligns with our purpose. So a fully integrated purpose driving decisions. C-suite more likely to see it. They're more likely to see that sort of turned up volume since the pandemic. And I also think that they're more likely to ask about the company's purpose during the hiring process. And so all of that culminates into, if their company believes that they're more focused on purpose, they would be more successful. And so it's not just around, are we doing it? Is it really sort of in there? Are we proud of it? But the C-suite actually, we see a lack of translation even at the manager level into like, by the way, this could make a really big difference. We would be more successful. So we see some inconsistencies by level. The next thing we want to talk about on the next slide, I think, is taking one of these horizontal looks across the organization. And I think, for me personally, there's lots of cool things that came out. I do encourage you all to download the full report. But when we look at this by functional area, imagine that those in strategy are less likely to see how their work contributes to the company's purpose. These are the people that decide what companies to buy, that decide how to innovate, that decide what their product roadmap should be. This should be intrinsically linked to purpose. So we see some real opportunities within organizations, those in strategy roles, not quite seeing it. Feel accountable to act in line with my company's purpose. Those in marketing, not so much, not as much as you'd like. Given the potential for marketing to actually tell that story, to actually bring along whole buckets of consumers to behave in more sustainable and socially supportive ways. And so it's really interesting just to think that now HR, I don't want to use the phrase drank the Kool-Aid, but like HR is very clearly, they see it, they get it, they know that everybody that interviews for a job in their role asks about this. So they are very, very aware about how important this is. Sales does a little bit better than marketing and strategy, but we do see an opportunity there as well to tell, how can their work impact society? Are they using purpose in their storytelling with prospective customers? But you just see some opportunities here that were very clear to us across the employees. So I do think it's interesting. So yes, it's important, and maybe there's some deficit areas where it's not playing out completely equally, but when you look at employees as a population, this is not a community wishing for thoughts and prayers around purpose. This is a community very much looking for progress. They think companies should double down right now. They think purpose should be embedded more deeply. And again, that's going beyond just giving money or having a work day on it, but this is about all the things that matter more. How are we actually strategically investing and making a difference? Many people feel that there's absolutely companies should be behaving in ways more in line with its purpose. So you'll see the numbers slightly lower for defining. What was interesting this wave is that we saw employees were like, we don't have to talk anymore about what it is. We got to just do it. And that very much is part of the cultural zeitgeist right now, what we're seeing from the American public in general. We got to just do it. And so we absolutely see that as employees seeing plenty of opportunities. The opportunities, I'll tell you, are not necessarily in the C-suite in that rarefied hall, paneling perhaps. Senior leadership scorecard is quite high. We see that they're given credit not just for communicating internally with employees and being that sort of leader motivating, but also we see they're giving credit communicating with external stakeholders about their purpose in the world beyond profit. And that is how we define purpose throughout this study, or purpose beyond profit, in addition to profit. And they also see, so it's not just communication. I want to really honor the fact that the C-suite is also credited with acting consistently with their purpose, right? So they're given credit for behaving in ways in step with what they're saying matters. If we go to the next slide, though, we can see that there are opportunities, right? Perhaps not in the C-suite as much, but when we ask employees, like, what do you hope your company does when it comes to purpose? I think it's really interesting where you see the energy here on the left-hand side, where the data is stronger, where employees, more than half of employees are saying, you know what, I need you to link that purpose with what I care about. And this link to personal values, if I had, I cannot overstate how important shared values are. And so the importance here is really playing back that employees feel of feeling really, really connected at a personal way with that purpose. They want to be involved. Employees are the ambassadors. Purpose cannot be delivered authentically without employees. Purpose cannot be defined without employees. It doesn't matter which data, which variable you look at in this data. It's extraordinarily clear that the time to engage employees is now. We see that there's a call for purpose to be more prominent in customer interactions. And again, we're going back to that. Maybe we saw a little bit of that with marketing, with sales, not quite as seeing how they're role connected, right? And employees are paying attention. Right? We're seeing this being played out very clearly. And so we really get a sense of, this is the suggestion box and the wish list, so to say, of what employees around the nation, Manager Plus, are actually calling for from their employers. And then actually, lastly, I believe, is we asked the question, I mean, I think a lot of employers are concerned purpose could be seen as sort of a lack of humility when we talk about purpose, when we behave and when we activate purpose and when we share those stories. And so that we wanted to understand what actually are authenticity triggers, right? What are the things that a company can do that would make it seem like, oh, that's not just lipstick, that's like real, like that company really cares. And what we find here is that some of the things that really read very authentically, and again, it's about employees. When you engage employees in purpose, you absolutely see that that is seen as coming from a very, very authentic place. When your internal programs and your internal policies are in step, purpose does not happen out here. They actually happen at the policy level. We have to create systems and frameworks. This is what employees are telling us, that purpose can be activated. And that shows authenticity when it's on your homepage, when it's actually part of maybe a welcome in every meeting, when it's informing hard decisions, not just decisions, hard decisions about where to invest. Right? That's when purpose is really brought to life. And we're showing this data here by those who say that their purpose is mature, meaning it's fully embedded throughout the organization, it's informing those hard decisions, versus those who say like, we've defined it, but we're just sort of feeling our way around. And you see also that those who actually are in more mature purpose cultures have sort of a more open mind to what authenticity looks like. You see more willingness to see things as sincere. So I think that sort of the dividends of that sort of pay themselves out in terms of how you activate. So I think that that's sort of the culmination, and I'm just going to pass it back to Carol before the conversation.
Great, thank you, Wendy. And that was a great, great summary and great highlights. You've covered a lot of these, and I'm not going to cover them all, but I'd like to start. Number one is that so many companies now, through the great contemplation and such, they're actually going back to what they thought there was their purpose, and they're saying, let's go a lot deeper. And so I would just like to say, for any company or brand that's out there, truly, if you're going to do that, and we suggest that you do, if it was done only with a handful of people, it needs to go deep into the company, across the company, engage your employee resource groups, do surveys, and get to the manufacturing floor, not just the highest levels of the organization. You need to engage everybody, and then you need to socialize it like mad, and socialize and socialize and socialize, because you want to bake it into culture. That's how you make it authentic. Now I want to go down to number 5, this whole thing about linking or aligning personal and organizational values. One of my dear friends, Jonathan Atwood, formerly of Unilever, he uses this phrase, the great unlock. And companies that truly get it, TCS, Tata Consultancy Services, PwC, Unilever, and for example, 3M, when their employees come into the organizations, they go through processes to understand their personal why. The biggest thing a company can do to help their employees understand their personal why. And then what the company can do is, for the great unlock, is that they can link it to the company's purpose. What is the job that's the appropriate job for you? create that amazing alignment and what you get from it. And we have absolutely, if you're not a believer, gosh, for those of us who have done the work, we have seen employees just light up. They're passionate, they're engaged, this connection of my personal reason for being, and then how I connect it to my company. It is an amazing shifter of personal passion, energy, and results. So that's really, really good. Another one, this whole thing about ambassadors. Now, we did research with Harris in 2019 and launched it right before the pandemic. It was called the B2B Purpose Paradox. And we really wanted to dive deeply into the B2B universe. And what we found, interestingly, that 86% of those we interviewed, they had a purpose, but only 24% had it activated. Now, look, during the Great Contemplation and such, all of a sudden you're getting up to 40, 50, 60% of companies are now more mature. Because you know why? Because the C-suite saw during the pandemic, they had to take care of their employees. They had to protect them. Whether they were in a factory or they're working from home, they had to create glue. They had to protect them. They had to support their safety. And so when you do that, you are creating tremendous believers in your organization, ambassadors, and not everybody's going to love and embrace your purpose. You need to identify through HR, through your team leaders, who are those people who totally are engaged, and then work with them to spread your purpose activation through the organization. Really, really powerful. So I'm not going to go into any more of these because I think the next power is going to be, but before we move there, Whitney, I want to say the reason, because I didn't do this in my introduction, the reason we call this purpose under pressure is that purpose is at a crossroads. Okay, two roads diverge in a yellow wood, right? Okay, one is authentic, deep, powerful, integrated across the organization. Through my podcast, Purpose 360, and I got to give a shout out. I know there's some PwC folks on the call. I finally did my podcast with Shannon Schuyler, who I think is one of the OGs in the entire field. I adore her. She was so great. That podcast you guys have got to listen to because PwC gets it about the great unlock and identifying personal and then as well as company purpose coming together. Now, the other path, and we've heard so much about it, purpose washing, green washing, pink washing. I'm now hearing sports washing. And no offense, and I love Cannes. I love Cannes. I wanted Cannes. I've spoken at Cannes. I've been a judge at Cannes. Beautiful purpose in so many of the winners. But some of our trade journalists said, a lot of PR stunts. A lot of PR stunts. And so longevity, sustainable commitment and action, that's where purpose must go. That's where the C-suite gets it. And by the way, if you haven't read Alan Murray's book, Tomorrow's Capitalist, you must, because he's talking about so many C-suite executives really, really doing this well. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Whitney, and Whitney's going to ask some provocative questions. And don't forget, put some of your questions in the chat.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you to Wendy. Just a great download of the research. But again, you can check out the full report on the website. So definitely make sure to check that out, purposeunderpressure.com. And with that, let's dive into a conversation, welcoming Erin to the stage as well at this time. And really want to unpack, what can we learn from this research? We all love data. I'm a self-professed data nerd, but the key is taking it and applying it and giving it meaning through our own work. So let's dig into some questions here. And the first, I want to focus on that key takeaway number 5, Carol, that you were outlining, personal values alignment to purpose. And the talent market, it continues to be tumultuous. the great resignation, the great reshuffle. We're all hearing these terms still in play. And in fact, late breaking research from McKinsey this month showing that 40% of global employees are still reconsidering leaving their jobs in the next 3 to 6 months. This is still in play. And yet at the same time, we're seeing warnings of a potential recession, obviously implications for the job market related to that. So for the panel, and I'll kick it over to Erin first, why do you think employees are more focused on values alignment and working for a company with a positive impact than the past? And Wendy, you kind of kicked us off a little bit with the chart you shared at the beginning related to this.
Yeah, I mean, Wendy and Carol talked a lot about the amount of time that people spend doing the job, right? And I think that not only one thing that we didn't uncover, but that I've seen in so many conversations when working to recruit new folks to join our amazing team, has been really underscoring and being able to understand the need to demonstrate personal pride. So how am I actually contributing to my workplace is one key driver, but what do my kids think about what I'm doing in the office all day? What are my parents, my friends, how do they see the impact of the work that I do, and what could I be proud to share on my social networks? I know it sounds a little corny, but if you really think about from each of your perspectives, what brings you to the table, whether it's a virtual, your virtual office or you're going in, it's not just all of the things that make you feel good, but it's also having a sense of pride that you're doing more than just paying the bill. You're contributing to something that matters to you and matters to the communities where you live.
Yeah, and Erin, I'll just build on that. We're seeing that as even more important as we look at younger generations. They are not willing to go to work and not have that values alignment, not be able to share and feel proud of where they're working and put it on their LinkedIn. And Carol, we were chatting about this a little bit on Friday in terms of, bringing meaning to work. What is the meaning of meaning? What does meaning in work mean to individuals, actually?
I think we all could have probably weeks of conversation about what is the meaning of meaning. I think it gets back to my personal why, because meaning for one person may be very, very different for another. And I think, again, is that the companies who are truly unleashing the exceptional talent of their employees spend time, especially when employees first come into work, the first 2-3 weeks, even 2-3 months. And for example, with Tata Consultancy Services, they are given an assignment with a not-for-profit as their first client. And so again, if they haven't discovered their meaning, they're getting a chance of truly just demonstrating connectivity with another human being and with exceptional needs of a not-for-profit. So, but I'd ask my other colleagues, what do you think the meaning of meaning is?
One thing, I know we're talking a lot about abstracts, and somebody in the Q&A just said, what are some real examples? So I think about, and Carol, you're part of this, we have the privilege of working for Aflac, one of our key clients together. And we've been able to talk to them and get to know so many different levels of employees, from the C-suite all the way down to the sales force in the field, right? And without giving too much away about how that functions, we know that Aflac stands for caring on purpose, which is to put care at the center of everything they do and have people's back when they need it most. And to be able to talk to employees who live and breathe that every day and feel like their employer has their back, whether it comes to offering, the right benefits and offering the time off that they need, but also paying it forward around the world and across the country, has really rallied that workforce. And so I think the meaning of meaning is really resonating with the individuals that make the brand happen. The people behind the brand are what gives the brand meaning. That's my attempt to bridge the philosophical here with a real example.
Well, can I just contribute to that? Because I think honestly, what paralyzes, I think, some companies is meaning in a divided world. So what's meaningful to one may not be meaningful to another. And there's plenty of data to support the things we disagree about. But I think what I would like to invite everybody watching to think about is that there are some, we look at companies who lead with a purpose that's human, that's civic. So the Aflac example, perfect example, right? And then we look at companies, and there are examples out there of companies that are more sort of seen as meddling in policy. Well, okay, maybe you could boil that down to a human value, but how you did that wasn't exactly right. And so I think at the Harris Poll, we have tons of like examples of how you can bring a lot of meaning in a unifying way. And I think that's a really important part of corporate purpose right now, is that unifying factor. Because shared values, there are many shared values. We love to talk about the ones that aren't shared, honestly, but there are many shared values. And I think this type of, be it a member of the public or an employee, I feel that's where that meaning sits in purpose.
That's a great insight, Wendy. Thank you. And at the end of the day, whatever organization you are a part of is made up of human beings. So how do we create meaning through empathy, human to human connection in organizations? And Wendy, I'm going to pick up on one of the disconnects that you shared in the research, which is pretty incredible, which is this disconnect between how C-suite leaders are kind of buying in on purpose. They feel it, they understand it, they see the value, they know how it builds successful organizations. But at lower levels within the organization or different levels within organizations, we're not seeing that big uptick. So for the panel, how can senior leaders better engage all levels of staff and employees around purpose? I'll put it up to the floor if somebody wants to kick it off.
Well, it goes back to when I said, when you're trying to uncover your purpose, I get really scared when I hear there's a C-suite leader and they're going to invite 3 or 4 of their senior team and we're going to discover it. You have got to go deep, and you have to go across as well in different geographies. And the other area, which I just think is so important, the level, is the manufacturing floor. And it is so, and also then you have the issue of unions too. So that's another thing that confounds it. But the manufacturing floor, there is a way to be able to get feedback. You could do it through employee resource groups, but it's taking the time and having the patience to go deep and across. And that's how you understand what is meaningful and the authenticity and such, and the key messages and phrases that truly should be in a purpose statement. And then you start hearing the gems about how to activate it.
Yeah, I would add, I think we talked a lot about employees being humans. I think one of the things that makes all of us feel less than is when you have a C-suite leader who stands up at the World Economic Forum or, stands up on a company town hall and just unveils with a lot of pomp and circumstance the new purpose strategy or new ESG goals. And I think that's the level of authenticity that's missing for employees. So in order to leapfrog that, it's really about those conversations, Carol, that you're mentioning, those who are connected to product and can get to the manufacturing floor, but those who are offering services. I think PwC is also was a longtime client of mine, and to think about how they've managed to weave purpose into everything they do by not just listening to their employees, but tapping their employees to inform everything from benefits to goal setting, I think is another great example. So it's the ERGs that you mentioned, and it's also kind of creating that two-way communication between employees at all levels of the organization back to.
Well, and if I could say one thing that was, we had, as Carol mentioned, we did this in 2019. I'm looking at B2B companies, those who work for B2B companies. It's sort of more in that space, but nevertheless, my guess is that this is true elsewhere. So we have a baseline of how likely employees were, not just in the defining stage or in the how should we activate it, but to share their company's purpose activities on social media. So literally becoming those ambassadors. So we're activating it and I'm telling those stories. So we look at the broader reputational opportunities there. And what we found is that one of the things that changed most dramatically, so lots of things changed, right? My company's a little better at purpose, a little bit more embedded, no drama, just sort of the basic things. But the thing to me that was most noteworthy about what's changed from 2019 is employees' willingness to share information about their company's purpose activities on their own personal social media channels. So sort of taking what Aaron said and saying, okay, but let's say now we put on top of that, this increased willingness. So once I feel invested in it and I've helped define it, and I'm actually the point, so many times in preparing for this, it came to mind, employees just aren't witnessing this stuff. We're not witnessing this, right? We're absolutely, and we as the universal employee, we are absolutely part of it. And I think that's really important, because once you're part of it, and companies that do that well, we see employees really willing to tell those stories loud and proud.
Right. And I want to build on that because in my podcast, Purpose 360, when I interviewed recently Alan Murray, who's the CEO of Fortune Media, and I asked him the question we all wanted to ask: how the heck do we get our efforts covered in the media? And his answer was really simple, exactly what you said, Wendy, which is your employees are your greatest amplifier of what you are doing. And if they are deeply engaged authentically, they'll tell theirs, and you allow them. We've had some clients that, no, you can't talk. Oh my God. You can't control it. Allow them to tell their stories and amplify what you're doing.
And some industries have swim lanes there for real reasons, but yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
And I think it's allowing them and empowering employees. And as part of the co-creation process, they're really able to feel empowered. And that's your biggest megaphone for your purpose story. And also your first stakeholder they're probably called BS if you're not quite doing it right? So a great gut check on your programs and to get that feedback while it's still being built. It's so important. I feel we could talk forever. I'm going to move us to the next question. One more aha, and then I want to ask some specialized questions for each of you. Let's talk about this insight from the research, which is around lack of buy-in in specific functions. I think this was really big, something that came across. Marketing, sales, strategy, not quite feeling it. How can we move the needle here? How can leaders ensure that purpose is just less siloed overall? That's really, the next frontier in purpose.
Well, I'll jump in. The CEO, the C-suite has got to be definitive about the power of purpose. And that is about business strategy and engagement with society and the environment. It's not either or, it's the power of and, but it has to be led by the C-suite. And what's so exciting, and this is a funny sort of analog, but remember, for those of you back in the day, remember the annual report, the big, gorgeous, glossy, printed annual report? That's gone. That's a 10K today. What's the report? It's a social impact report. And it's where the CEO starts with his or her letter and talks about the role of the company's purpose and the engagement with society of that organization, as well as very much today, their DE&I efforts. And then all of course, their ratings and rankings and such. Remember the old annual report? Now it's the social impact report led by the CEO.
I actually think the funny thing to me is that, Carol, talking about reports is one thing, and another is that marketing function being so exhausted, right? So, I have the privilege of working with many, many marketing leaders, right? I love them all, but they are burned out. They are focused on producing things that meet folks' for functionality. They're focused on product quality and price. We're back to quality and price, just like we were before the pandemic, and it's become even more important, especially with inflation. And so I think what we need to do, instead of asking the marketing folks to do better, we're asking them not to add a layer of marketing, not to further dimensionalize their own efforts or to de-emphasize product quality and price, but to kind of elevate purpose into that narrative. And I think that we know how to do that, right? So that's what a lot of folks come to Headstand and Allison and Partners for help with, is how do we kind of make this dynamic marketing matrix really resonate with consumers? And I think that the marketing folks, and the reason they're not as bought in, it's not because they don't see the value in reaching the niche consumer who is looking for purpose in the brand they support. They get that. They're the smartest folks in the room a lot of times. They just don't have the time and they don't have the marketing budget. They're focused on their ad spots and their buys. So how do you kind of elevate and tell a compelling story that doesn't leave purpose on the table because they feel like they have to focus on everything else? And that's where I think instead of asking for more and better, we need to kind of get smarter about the way that we're building those the marketing mixes, for sure.
I love that. I just love that, Aaron. I totally agree with you. And I think the only thing I would add to what you two have said is literally companies measure what matters, right? Mm-hmm. Shows up on a scorecard, you call up the scorecard, and every month you look at it, you see if you're moving the needle. Like, it just reminds people, like, this is what we care about. So for those I mean, all the anxieties of every employee, marketing has them. And by the way, they're also IT managers. Right? So let's measure what matters. To what extent are we making purpose-led decisions? How about we put that on a scorecard? What percentage of our efforts are contributing to this priority ABC, right? So I think also embedding purpose into those metrics that motivate, because Carol, I agree, having a CEO sort of, rain down sort of how important this is important, but until you tell me that in my department, 20% of my transactions have to actually support blah, 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 like, I think that is the thing. So the idea of putting purpose more clearly into metrics and saying we measure this because it matters.
And we're seeing a lot of it put into KPIs.
Yeah.
So when it's in KPIs, you get the focus of various functions.
Exactly. It's not just the governance. I think we talk a lot about governance, KPIs, and boards of directors having responsibility, but at the individual level, we look at the job description, how the job descriptions are written for every function, HR, marketing, we should start to see, right? And to Wendy's point, we should be able to measure whether applicants are applying for jobs where purpose is an implicit, a very explicit part of the job versus an implicit one. We learn a lot about that when we talk about our functions at the agency. So I think making the explicit purpose and kind of ESG advancement part of the job description could also be helpful.
100%. And I think that quote, Wendy, measure what matters, even beyond specific job descriptions and KPIs. What are the team metrics? What are they leading towards? What is the marketing team? What are their levels of success, and how can we kind of change those descriptions to really kind of have us think differently about what success is within different functions? So thank you everyone that's been putting questions in the Q&A. We're going to get to that in a minute. I want to get to some specialized questions, but I'm going to ask our panelists to be succinct so that we can get to our audience Q&A. There's a lot of great things coming in. Erin, I'm going to turn it to you first. And we just talked about lack of pull-through in specific functions, but in your role, what are you seeing in terms of successful purpose pull-through? Any examples that you can share or things that you're seeing in the marketplace?
Yeah, I'll be brief. And I think one of the things is that kind of bringing purpose into the marketing mix at the same level as product quality and price. So a lot of what we're seeing now, and I'll use Aflac again as an example, just because they've leveraged their marketing dollars and their integration into sports sponsorships to elevate their purpose. They are talking to consumers across the country, especially consumers of color, about the need to, kind of guard yourself against medical debt and the fact that medical debt is just around the corner. And so they've taken a really novel approach with our help and support to reaching consumers and by elevating purpose into that kind of decision-making set. So that's one, I think it's really important to point out, is leveraging your marketing dollars to tell a compelling and dynamic story. So you're checking the box for your consumers, of which employees are a subset. So I think a lot of times employees roll their eyes when they see a new spot from their employer, right, on TV, or they hear a new ad on a podcast and they're like, oh, this doesn't make sense to me. I've never seen this day to day. You want the consumers of your brand, including employees, to believe what they see and to support and amplify.
Right, exactly. Okay, turning it over to Wendy, oh gosh, we probably couldn't even count how many research reports you've been instrumental in creating, but I'd love to know, kind of across the Harris research portfolio and the research that you're conducting, any themes that either align with purpose under pressure or maybe actually diverge from some of the findings that we've seen. Anything you want to call out?
Yeah, so I'll say two quick things. One, I would say, is this whole notion of agency, this whole notion of where culture and society turns to for solutions has moved. So we don't trust government, we don't trust the media, we don't trust, fill in the blank, right? We don't trust our neighbor, depending on what sort of sign is on their front yard in November, right? But we trust business all of a sudden. We trust CEOs, right? So I think that this movement towards companies having agencies, being agents for good, is sort of new, and there's a volume up. And so what I'm seeing in this research that very much sort of supports that is that now it's not just companies, but employees are like, my job is my vote, right? I want this whole idea of I reconsidered who to work for because where I work for, because I can help them be a better social impact is really important. I think the second thing that is a huge sort of wave coming through are expectations around transparency. If I could think about what consumers wake up expecting to understand about a company today, it's wildly different than before. Or I need to know what you value. It's sometimes stance, but I would just sort of keep it in. I need to know what you care about. Every day, consumers, we used to need to know about the tomato. Was it good? We care a lot about the farmer, right? And we feel like we somehow have this, we're entitled to knowing that, right? The last 2 years has made it very clear that we need to know that. And so basically what we're seeing in this research is part of that same thing. We ask employees, what do you value personally? What do you personally value? What do you wake up valuing? What are you putting in your children? And then we ask, what is your company value? And one of the areas we see the biggest gaps is transparency. So I thought it was really interesting, this movement towards understanding. I mean, like ESG is sort of a part of that, right? And the calls to action sometimes comes from the investment community and sometimes comes from the public. Now I think we're in the employee wave of that, right? We're in the employee wave of expecting transparency. This whole thing, what's authentic? I want to know how it's informing our M&A strategy, our new product development. Employees wouldn't usually have asked that. So I think this move towards feeling absolutely entitled to have a full line of sight into whatever I need to know, for better or worse, for me feels like one of these larger trends that we're seeing at the Harris Poll that this research really is.
That's great, Wendy, and certainly something that we've seen, that trend toward employee activism now kind of moving into this, like, we're going to take a look at everything within our organization. If we don't love what we're seeing, we're going to go find another job, because we have that ability, you know, to kind of seek out something that is a better values alignment. So Carol, I'm going to have you bring it home, and then we're going to open it up to audience Q&A. Let's dig in on this concept of pressure. Purpose under pressure, name of the report. We talked about it earlier. What's the sense of urgency related to purpose today? And maybe what's the biggest shift you've seen in purpose over the past 2 years?
Oh, big question. The biggest shift, again, I think, is the focus on employees. And I think that COVID really took the entire C-suite and said, we have to be very human. We have to be caring. Care and protection is number one. And then I think in doing that, then also the shift in, we're not all returning to work and hybrid work. And then how are we going to structure our organizations? Again, learning from our purpose, that will then say, okay, how are we going to work? How are we going to trust? Trust is really, really a huge issue. And I do agree with Wendy about transparency. So I think that that's just one of the big changes in the last 2 years.
Definitely. And you know, purpose being pressure tested, and companies that are able, you know, during these times of crisis, to be able to lean in on it and use that as a directional, really being successful. Okay, let's jump into some audience questions. We've had a lot come in, so thank you, everyone. We've had a couple questions come in related to the connection between purpose and ESG, how they live together. What's the current state? Any examples of integration? Erin, I saw you jumping in on the chat here and answering one. Do you want to expand on what you shared in terms of the relation between purpose and ESG?
I mean, my take, but Carol's kind of coined some of these herself, so I'll let her weigh in. I think that my take is that it's kind of ESG, commitments, goal setting, and then progress against environmental, social impact, and then kind of governance for that impact is really the strategy behind purpose. The brand purpose is about your values, what you stand for beyond making money, how you bring that to life and everything that you do. And then that ESG strategy is key to driving actual impact, whether you're talking about reducing water use, emission, et cetera. So that's my summary. Carol, what do you, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in on the work that we did with Campbell, because it was, it started out as really refining the framework and the narrative of their ESG efforts. And companies today have so many different efforts, and they're trying to create a thread. We keep hearing this desire. We need this golden thread or red thread from our purpose that will then be informed by our values, our mission and vision, but then how we're really taking action in all of these various, pillars or directional areas. I think it takes a lot of work. And I think, again, getting SMEs across the company, having workshops, really working on both the core language that in a way needs to be really simple, but profound. Then you can have your proof points underneath. And then we always like to create a beautiful manifesto that can be both written as well as put into a video.
And you can start, I mean, I think a lot of clients struggle or stumble because they're not sure where to start, right? Do we start from coming up with a manifesto, a purpose statement? Do we start from a position of what are the material issues to our business? And I think so wherever you want to start from, or wherever based on the kind of company's maturity, I think partners like us, you're not here to be pitched, all those listening in, but I think what we do and help to do is to define both the brand purpose or to help establish or realign ESG goals to kind of meet and live up to your corporate purpose. So I think having a partner that can kind of either build from the ground up or the top down could be really helpful for those who are struggling.
And I want to give another shout out to PwC, because in my conversation with Shannon, the company has open sourced so much of their learning. And I didn't know this. They have 2,000 best practices that they have learned across the globe as they have created a greater sense of belonging and really, evolved their purpose, which is available to anyone listening or just to anyone. And I think that sort of generosity is really, really critical today, to share what we've learned so that we will accelerate becoming much more human and engaging with the world versus just trying to make a buck.
I love that. We need more collaboration, more information sharing. These issues that we are facing as a society, they're too big, too broad, too urgent for just one organization to tackle alone. So what can we share as a community to kind of accelerate progress across companies and really deepen purpose so that we can activate more? And Erin, you touched on this kind of like, where do you start? And that's actually a question that came through the Q&A. How do you go about getting your company started on defining your purpose? Where do you start? So I'll open it up to the group, whoever wants to jump in quickly on that.
Well, since we've done it for so long, probably longer than anyone, but we have a process. It's called P3, and it's a codified way. Every single client is customized and the way they approach it. But there's very thoughtful ways where you start out with, your objectives and your business, and then you take it down through this funnel in terms of you develop criteria about, what will your purpose, what are the good things it's going to do? What are the things it's not going to do? Who are your audiences by priority? That's another thing that we find in terms of doing this work so much, that we're always asking. Someone says, oh, I want to impact everyone. You've got to prioritize, who are you trying to impact? What is the order? What's the geography? What are you trying to accomplish? Then look at your assets, which is, every company's got assets and capabilities, and your purpose must truly align with your capabilities. And so I could go on longer, but I won't. So Wendy or Erin?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, right, is starting with employees. I think that the moral of this whole webinar is that employees are at the center, and if they're not bought in, then no one else will be. So to me, it's starting with employees. So what has worked? What values do resonate? What are people saying about the company when they join? Are they reporting out on having experiences that meet their expectations in their exit interviews, right? How are you polling them to understand what matters to them? What social causes we're actually going through this a little bit at the agency now, right? What causes have they supported in the past? What gets them excited about raising their hand and jumping in? So I would say too, building off of that, Carol, is just when it comes to prioritizing and where to start, I think it has to start with employees when building either a set of ESG strategies or starting with a purpose brand platform.
Yeah, I would agree with all that, particularly I think the measuring part, and I would actually go beyond employees. I mean, I think from my standpoint, you also might want to start with what you do, what you make, what your service costs, right? You want to be 1 degree of separation from that. Like, I mean, I think to come out with a purpose that's truly out of left field, feels inauthentic, feels like actually like sort of the what you do and the assets you have and the triggers that you have to pull won't actually get you there. So so there's a certain logic, I think, to some of this that a lot of companies acknowledge as well. And I don't think it's bad to say that, right? So I do think that a data-driven approach makes sense. I think other companies say, what does the world need? Right? Like I think that things happen in the world that make that raise issues up. Think of racial equity, think of gun control, right? There are moments in time that actually have, so we think of purpose as sort of more longitudinally steady, but there's also moments where perhaps a tentpole purpose can activate differently depending on, the trends we're seeing and the needs, literally what the world needs.
And there's a really important part about aspiration. We call it, we actually have this exercise, it's purpose ambition, because some companies really want to be highly aspirational. They want that North Star. They want it to be really, really broad. And then some want it to be really, really tight. And so asking, again, a number, certainly groups of key employees and functions, where do you want to be? How do you want to impact, et cetera, to get that aspirational level? Because not every company wants to be as high as the moon. Some want to be just, at the local level. So that's really important to identify.
Great. There's a lot more questions in the Q&A. I don't think we're going to get to all of them today, but let's keep the conversation going on LinkedIn. Please put your questions in the comments there. We'll keep it going. I know we're trying to answer some of them in real time right now through the chat. I want to get to kind of a final lightning round for our panel in terms of kind of this closing comment that you need to make, the one thing you need to leave behind that we should all take back to our work. I'm going to kick it off. One thing we didn't really talk about is, a potential economic downturn, recession, media critics saying, oh, purpose will be the first thing to go. What we're seeing in this research is that the C-suite believes that purpose is a critical key to success, business success. So I would like to say, I don't see purpose being put in the back corner during a potential economic downturn, but really embedded into business success for short and long-term results. Carol, I'll kick it over to you.
Sure. I would say one, be courageous, but to really be courageous, but also this is about business and society. It is not either or, it's not just about one or the other, it's the combination, and the power of and is amazing.
Wendy.
You got to measure what matters. If you don't tell the organization what they should strive for, and we keep thinking for decades for different things, we kept thinking that people will just sort of rise up and do the right thing. Right? I think giving them KPIs, measuring what matters is extraordinarily important, not just in defining, but in maintaining this as a focal point that educates the organization that this is what we care about. This is why we measure it. And plus, by the way, we've never seen things changing as much, right? That first chart I started out with, like I, in many years, have not seen this level of volatility in what matters. And so I think it also matters just pragmatically to sort of keep pulse of your effort.
Aaron, final thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that breaking down silos means not making employees an afterthought. So when we all sit around as marketers and communicators or purpose leaders and we start sketching out a rollout plan or a communications plan to really communicate the impact that our organization's having, employees need to be line number one, right? And then your consumer segment. So don't leave employees behind at the planning stage, and they won't be left behind or rolling their eyes later on.
Love that. No eye rolling. That's a good thing to learn more. So thank you again to the panel. We're nearing the 1 hour mark. Just want to, again, it's been amazing to collaborate with all of you on this research. I hope it is useful to everybody on the phone. Wendy, Carol, Aaron, thanks for your time today. I think that we are all, very open and available to answering any additional questions. Let's keep the conversation going. You have our LinkedIn information. And with that, have a wonderful afternoon and morning.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.